the third joint report that the World Economic Forum has carried out with the World Bank and the African Development Bank, where we bring together the research of our three organizations in order to sort of gauge the situation in terms of competitiveness in Africa. And what we see this year is that Africa has indeed weathered the economic storm of the last couple of years quite well. However, there are questions as to how sustainable this growth will be going into the future, because in fact, one of the reasons that Africa did not suffer so much from the crisis is because it's sort of limited in terms of its integration into international markets. And so while this sheltered African economies in the shorter term, it will hold back their development going into the future. So one of the main messages coming out of the report is that African economies will need to continue to integrate themselves better into the global economy and also carry out the productivity enhancing reforms that are so important. The theme of this year's report is capitalizing on Africa's resources. And so what we're looking at are the many resources beyond the vast sort of mineral wealth of Africa in order to see what could be done in order to enhance productivity with such resources. And we look specifically at a number of areas. We do look, of course, at how Africa could integrate itself better into trade and financial markets, but also, very importantly, we look at higher education, education which is so important for innovation and innovative potential. We look at how to enhance women's entrepreneurship, another really underutilized resource in Africa. And finally, through the cultural and natural resources, we look at tourism and how tourism could be a vehicle for improving growth, opportunities for employment, poverty reduction in Africa. The government clearly has an important role to play in enhancing national competitiveness. And this is through obviously creating a business-friendly environment and also ensuring basically that we have the necessary human and physical infrastructure. But also, I think it needs to take a more broad approach and ensure that competitiveness is integrated into the national development strategy more generally, instead of being an ad hoc approach on a one-off basis by policy. So this is a very important issue. Now, the private sector, of course, also has a very important role to play in terms of expressing its needs in wealth creation within the economy. And what we've seen is that this sort of public-private dialogue can be very critical in furthering national competitiveness. Now, one of the vehicles that we've seen around the world that is very useful for institutionalizing this public-private dialogue, these are called national competitiveness councils that bring the public and the private sector leaders together to discuss such issues on a regular basis. Now, unfortunately, in Africa, we see that most countries have not put into place a national competitiveness council. So one of the messages coming out of the report is that the creation of such national competitiveness councils could be very useful both at the national level in terms of this ongoing discussion, but also in terms of providing a framework for dialogue among African countries, sharing of best practices, and really looking at how African countries together can move forward in terms of improving their competitiveness.